And now, San Mateo County Libraries is thrilled to introduce Joshua Mohr. Joshua Mohr is the author of several books, including Damascus, which the New York Times called Beat Poet Cool. He's also written Some Things That Meant the World to Me, one of O Magazine's 10 terrific reads of 2009, and he's won the Northern California Book Award twice. Termite Parade was an editor's choice on the New York Times bestseller list. His latest project is a trilogy of novels, all to be published in one calendar year, starting with Saint the Terrifying in fall 24. In his Hollywood life, he sold projects to AMC, ITV, and Amblin Entertainment. All right, welcome. Welcome, Josh. How's it
Thank you.
going? And of course, this is Saint the Terrifying. You'll see my posty noted copy. I also tried to choose post-it notes that I felt like went with the
That's good.
yes, okay, you
Aesthetics
can
for
see
the
it
win,
flickering.
right?
Right. Definitely. And we're going to hear a little sample from the book. If that works for you, I'd love to, because there's a great voice in this book, so I wanted to hear a little bit of it before you jump into some questions.
Yeah, sure. I think what I'll do is I'll read a very short vignette that'll be about a page and a half, but I just want to read the introduction, the first paragraph of the book,
Great.
because the language on the line level is like so wild that I want sort of everybody to kind of hear how Saint Cadence wants to sound. So here's how the book actually starts. You're a person who has this story forming in your mind's eye, that marvelous imagination, that wonder hunter, that thunderstorm, that haunted house filled with the fertilizer of childhood, that drive-in showing dirty movies, that therapist couch, that dive bar, that frantic machine, that solitary confinement, that butcher cleaving your memories to meat, that manic depressive, that flat saxophone, that anxious child, that father's gnarled love, that mother's cusses and knuckles hustling around your skull, punishing, still punishing. And why can't we ever shush the roars from our, wait, what are we talking about? Right, the day I killed got jokes. So that's sort of how Saint wants to sound on the language level. And then I'll read a very quick scene from earlier in his life. If you'd never been in, it would be like an astronaut trying to explain the customs of an alien planet. Who you were the minute before they caged you up, none of that mattered. You did nauseating acts. It was the only way to come through. Even you, with your enlightened, level-headed mind, your mutual funds and IRAs, your thicket of impossible, brazen assumptions about the future. All that rotted instantaneously in Quentin. You learned on the quick what you were capable of doing. No reason to judge convicts on their transgressions. Just thank your gods that you didn't have to make those same decisions because they were not decisions at all. Not really. Not if you ever wanted to walk back out. And hopefully you still had a seed of a person in you on the other side. Dennis, a cellie of mine for a few months, he was a diaper sniper. This made his time there a nightmare. Dennis had to masturbate in front of a CO for extra protection, and he still took gruesome beatings. Always outmuscled, always outmanned. But I wasn't about to tell you some cable TV Jurassic Park bullshit about prison. No, this is a small, simple story about a human being named Dennis who had been slowly going blind. For years, he told me, he'd had glaucoma, everything losing color and focus. There were no foregrounds or backgrounds left for Dennis. No, there were only walls of color, all oozing toward blackness. Dennis knew better than to wake me up early, but on the morning, he said to me before the sun was up, "Hey, can you help me?" He turned on the little light and stood next to my bunk. "I'm sleeping, Dennis." "I know, and I'm sorry." "Well, cool, let's talk later then." "The thing is," he said, "I'm about to go blind." I sat up in bed. "What?" "Yeah, right now." "Well, then yell for the guard." "It's been getting dimmer and dimmer," Dennis said. but it's almost gone, man. I can barely see. So go to the dock. Oh, believe me, I've seen plenty of them, and they all said this day would come sooner or later. I just didn't know today was the one. You started this by asking if I could help you, I said. Right, said Dennis. I did say that. Sorry, I'm flustered. I've never gone blind before. It's a lot to take in. I want you to help me figure out what I should look at. What's the last thing I should see? We peered around our cell, a toilet, a sink, bunks, a laundry line, ratty towels, books, blank walls. You, he said to me. You want to see me? I asked. I'd like to look at another person when I go blind, he said. That seems nice. What was I supposed to say? Was there a way to deny such an eroding request? You'd never see this earth again, never know another sunset, a child, a fire, a narwhal. These things would all be conjectures, or they'd be memories. At least he'd have those, though, as we all knew, those deformed with time could disappear as our minds curdled. I stood up right in front of Dennis. He was only about 5 feet 10, so he gazed up at me. 10 seconds of us staring, and then I asked, what should we talk about? Let's not, he said. Let's just stare at each other. Two men, two animals, two jewels in our chests, simply staring. I had only one eye. He had two, but would soon have none that worked. Nobody else alive knew what was at stake at that moment. No one knew that another human was losing a sense, and no one would have cared anyway. A convict, a piece of shit, good, served him right. In one way or another, we all went blind. Okay, Dennis said to me. Okay, what? That's it. You can't see anymore, I asked. The sun, said Dennis, just set on the entire solar system. Thank you.
Well, thank you for reading that. That was I have so many questions that are connected to all parts of what we just heard, I think. And I was so struck reading throughout the book how much you focus on uh from the first passage, like announcing you are a person to the reader. And that was a passage again of characters asserting each other's humanity to each other in the moment. But before we get to that, I think we can start by talking also about what else you read in the first passage, which is introducing us to Saint's wonderful, propulsive punk rock voice, the Broken
Right.
Baroque,
The
as
broken road.
is called, exuberantly bending language with his brand of bad taste. How did you develop this voice? Or better, how did you end up like getting to know or meeting this whirled up saint and finding that and channeling that voice here?
I'm an old hipster, right? So I'm an old punk rocker. And so a lot of the bands that I grew up loving, whether it was Gorilla Biscuits or Butthole Surfers, were sort of these wild collisions of adjectives and nouns.
Hmm.
So this is the culture that the book is set in. I wanted to find a way to really honor that on the line level. I love being pretentious, obviously, but I also love being sort of reckless at the same time. So if I've done my job right, the book feels as though it's always about to fall apart.
Mhm.
In other novels of mine that need to sound more polished on the line
Mhm.
level to sort of honor the very peculiar music of that one character's beating heart, I left a lot of mistakes in Saint's story that I would have cleaned up with other
Mhm.
characters, but because he's living such a punk rock life, I wanted the artifact itself to be a reflection of the community that it comes from.
Totally. And that he is also in some ways, for the most part, he's very, geared towards and thinking about joy, but there's that feeling that he has he's facing some horrible challenges, and also there's that fear that he will go back to this old way of being in him too,
Yeah,
right? That he's in danger of breaking throughout too. Breaking,
absolutely.
yeah. So that is really striking that you put it that way. I was thinking about you said you leave left mistakes in this work, and there's a element of surrealism in the novel too, which I would love to know more about. But it reminded me of John Cocteau says something in his diary about making the film Beauty and the Beast, about mistakes in the movie, that mistakes are the cracks that let the poetry in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so the mistakes let the poetry in, and people who, yeah, if you're proofreading a piece of art, then you're missing the story anyway.
Well, there's an
Or for
interesting
as a reader, yeah.
there's an interesting conversation between that Cocteau quote and I think about Garcia Marquez,
Hmm. Hmm.
famously when asked about magical realism was like, there's no magic in this. Like, this is what it's like to live in Colombia.
Hmm.
Like, how do you
Yeah.
figure out a way to honor the subjective beauty of not only an ecosystem, but that one very singular vision of seeing and interacting with the world around it?
Right.
I'm a professor by trade, and so I'm always kind of teaching my students, like, I'm not interested in objective setting. Like, I'm interested in
Hmm.
subjective setting that could only spring forth from that one protagonist's heart.
Right. And yeah, I'm thinking about the antlers that Saint paints fluorescent yellow, and just that they are based on the reindeer he sees in Norway that look like they're
Yeah.
shot with electricity. How did that image come to you? That image that feels so surreal, but yeah, it's based in a real image that he sees.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever written a book where I would say to somebody, my favorite part of this story is the backstory.
Hmm.
But the childhood that I've cooked up with Saint in Norway, like his father raised him in the traditions of the old world.
Hmm.
So he was training, the Vikings had a martial art called Glima. Saint was wrestling bears by the time he was 12 or 13 years old.
Hmm.
So he kind of grew up in this mythology world. And my job was to figure out how to sort of extrapolate a lot of those principles and bring them forward. In reality, in Norway, a
Hmm.
bunch of farmers have trouble where their reindeer break out of the fences and
Hmm.
go onto highways. And
Hmm.
so cars are constantly being demolished because they're crashing into reindeers. So the farmers themselves have started to paint their antlers with highway reflective paint.
Hmm.
And when I stumbled upon that detail, I was like, oh my God.
Hmm.
Now that I know that Saint's going to grow up to play in a punk rock band, what if he's actually wearing antlers on stage? And not only that, what if he's painting them with that reflective paint so it looks as though he's wearing what he likes to call radioactive antlers on stage?
Yeah, right. And that the paint ends up being useful later on too. I love that so much. I'm wearing my little antler earrings today too,
Oh, I like it.
in honor of Saint.
Represent. Very good.
We had a question also from our registration list from a patron who asked, "What about Norse culture inspired you to write about it? What was exciting to you?" But, yeah.
More often than not, my inspiration comes from things I'm screwing around with my daughter.
Hmm. Hmm.
We live in Seattle, and I took her to the Nordic Museum in a neighborhood called Ballard.
Hmm.
And I mean, she wanted to know more about our Norwegian side of the family. I'm one of
Hmm.
those American mutts who doesn't know anything about where the hell they came from. And so her curiosity sort of led to my curiosity. And as we were leaving the gift shop, I bought a big old volume of Icelandic Viking sagas. And what
Hmm.
was really beautiful as I started to sink my teeth into these older works is that it was a kind of a marvelous permission slip to write in every genre simultaneously. Those
Hmm.
sagas are family stories, it's horror, it's fantasy,
Hmm.
it's surrealism, it's anything that I want it to be. The reality itself is very, very bendable.
Yeah,
I love feeling that kind of liberty on the page as a storyteller because I feel as though I can do anything.
right. That you're able to follow the impulses of the story too, maybe. I was
Absolutely.
I was wondering about one very maybe like more striking versions of this where you're kind of going anywhere you want, and they're very fun to read passages. You give us some Whole Foods hallucinations that are, as they sound, hallucinations of Saint finding himself in a Whole Foods checkout line, and his cashier is just named Billy. Billy Joe Armstrong of Green Day
Right.
is the idea. How did you find your Whole Foods hallucinations? How do we get transported to Whole Foods at different parts of this
How did we
of
start
this
hallucinating
saga?
the Whole Foods? I always start out like a seed in reality, right? And
Hmm.
so when I was in graduate school, I knew I wanted to be a professor, but I also didn't have any teaching experience.
Hmm.
I went to school at the University of San Francisco, and so while I was in the program, I volunteered at halfway houses to teach
Hmm.
writing classes. So I was volunteering at one in the Lower Haight and one in the Mission, and just meeting just the most amazing people. These were men typically that were only 3 or 4 weeks out of prison,
Hmm.
but I was the only person in their life that was asking them to write a poem.
Hmm.
So we just had this like really great camaraderie. And I knew
Hmm.
that I always wanted to write about that that experience, but how then do you start to bring it to life in a character-driven way that doesn't feel sort of didactic or
Hmm.
exploitative? So as Saint is getting out of San Quentin, he's in a halfway house that's in West Oakland. And before he got locked up, West Oakland was much wilder. Uh,
Hmm.
and then by the time he gets out, there's a Whole Foods.
Hmm.
That really becomes what the book is about. He's a
Hmm.
Viking. He absolutely in his bones wants to live the Viking life, but he also knows that he's not going to live that long if he chooses that path forward. So is he going to choose to be a Viking, or is he going to choose to live a Whole Foods life? And so
Hmm.
once I made that decision, there's like, okay, well, how can I have some fun with this?
Yeah.
I have no problem with Green Day, but Saint has a huge problem with pop punk. So he hates Billy Joe Armstrong. So the first hallucination starts off in a very contentious way, and then
Hmm.
despite himself, by the end of the story, they end up to be kind of fast friends.
I think it's almost hard for Saint to not see the humanity and just start to get to like somebody.
Well, what's
Um,
funny, Katie, is that like usually when I start a project, I have this sort of subversive programming where I will not even listen to myself tell me what to do.
yeah,
Right? So if I have a
I wish
great
that weren't
idea
relatable.
today and I like write a note like, hey, tomorrow, Josh, you should do this. This is going to really work out. I would not listen to it tomorrow. I'd be like, you can't tell me what to do yesterday, Josh. And I'm only mentioning that in the sense that is like, how do I figure out a way to sort of bring that joy to life? And so what I thought about first was not to start with image, how I normally
Hmm.
start a book.
Hmm.
I wanted to start with character. And so
Yeah.
the idea was like, what would happen if The Rock had a baby with Sid Vicious? And so like, I kind of started from that
Huh.
lens, and then started to put flesh and bones together and start to
Yeah.
bring this person to life in the most dynamic way that I possibly can.
Yeah. And he feels alive, and I'm really excited to read the next two installments of
Well,
the of his son as
I
well.
cooked him up in the tradition. Like I love spaghetti
Yeah.
westerns.
Uh-huh.
I'm a huge
Yeah.
advocate. I love Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. So I was really thinking about Clint Eastwood's The Man with No Name. You
Yeah.
know, this anti-hero who rides into town and does all the wrong things for the right reasons.
Yeah, it has its own set of ethics. And I also, you in the passage you read earlier, there's also you mention there's a conversation about choice in the past in San Quentin that there are no choices because if you make choices, you won't survive. Later on, um, a saint in a conversation with another character says that's the thing about us, we're always making choices. So he sort of defies his earlier. I love how many he doesn't he's not he's as full of contradictions as anyone is. I love the way you have written his contradictions. Um,
I don't know how you think about the alchemy of characterization, but one of the things that's really important to me as the novelist is what I like to call a core instability.
mm-hmm,
There's two things that exist in one human heart that cannot work together.
yeah,
So here's the Viking, here's the Whole Foods, and they're constantly creating this really interesting dissonance and friction in Saint's heart that then, informs his behavior moving forward because he's doing crazy things in this book.
yeah. And that there was another I was so interested in also his how you sort of let him be presented sort of moments from fate, even when he gets his guitar, it's like he's like,
Yeah,
this was always meant to be my missing limb, but that he's also very much making choices and sometimes rising to the occasion and saying, like, I will help you, even if his version of help. So
right.
what did you think about fate and choice as you were developing this character? Were those also like a maybe not the core knot, but was that one of his complications for you?
Yeah, I think for sure. Like the I love character-driven stories,
Hmm.
right? Like I have plot because I have to. That's
Yeah.
not why, like the books that really matter to me, my desert island books, have nothing to do with plot. It
Hmm.
always has to be with that kind of like beautiful camaraderie that comes between audience and main character.
Okay.
And so I want the audience to be as close to his decision-making mechanism, as close to his logic system, and as close to his moral center as you can possibly be. So even if he's doing things that belie your moral code,
Hmm.
you don't agree with what he's doing, but you understand what he's doing. Like I hate that word likability,
Hmm.
but I do think the word relatability is important. Like you
Hmm.
understand why Saint is choosing to behave this way. Now, are these fated decisions, or is this sort of pre-programmed from his Viking upbringing? Like he has a muscle memory that most of us don't have from the way
Hmm.
that his father brought him up. His father's version of love was very bare knuckle.
Hmm. Bear wrestling too.
Yeah.
Bare knuckled bear wrestling. Um, which is great. They had the bear, they hug. He and the bear hug also. So there's no violence against bears. I mean, there's violence against bears, but there's also an embrace. Um,
It would be okay with how
yeah,
we what we've done here.
totally. I think so. Um, speaking of, and we've kind of started to touch on this already. We're talking about, we've talked about the Norse mythology that's deeply rooted in this book and the history and the ancestry. Um, what do you view as, so Saint has his relation, what do you view as Saint's relationship to his past and then the future? Saint is compelled by his father Tron to not just honor the ancestors as Tron does in his art. He makes these beautiful glass birds. He says he does for the ancestors, but he also writes a memoir every year that he burns. The father does, right? And he tells Saint like that makes something that's in a book. It's in the for the future. You go be the book. You be the story. The Saint like take that. How are you thinking about storytelling as part of a character? I guess too as two questions.
Well, we'll get to the storytelling one in a second, but just from
Hmm.
a craft and technique standpoint, uh, because this whole project is crazy in the sense that who the hell writes three books at the same time?
Hmm.
Like, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
But like I'm so glad that I pushed myself artistically in this way. Like I've never done anything that's ambitious as this, where it's like 1,000-page Viking saga that's serialized over three books. Like to
Plus a
me,
record
it's
also.
one project, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about his characterization, I'm going to use some cheap alliteration in a second,
Hmm.
so let me
Hmm.
apologize ahead of time.
Can't
But I
wait.
was thinking about it in terms of quantum characterization,
Hmm.
meaning like in every scene, if I've done my job right as the novelist, there's a version of Saint that exists in the present,
Hmm.
a version of Saint that exists in the past, and
Hmm.
there's a version of Saint that exists in the future. So
Hmm.
he's interacting with sort of the current circumstances and the contextual information of that particular moment. He's also looking through sort of this litany involved of ghosts, some very kind ghosts, some
Hmm.
very malicious ghosts. At the same time, that's supplying sort of the anxiety and the frantic energy about what's to come. So I wanted all of the three of these saints to be sort of in conversation with one another in every scene in the book.
How did you enter that as a writer? How did you, was that something that you were able to always sort of channel through in that first draft? Did that come with later drafts and refining? Did you like have a saint entering spell to know his past and his future in the moment of sitting down?
If you were to put me on the couch, I
Yeah.
honestly think it's because my project right before this was a memoir called Model
Mm-hmm.
Citizen. It was
Hmm.
forcing sort of me as the auteur to also simultaneously be the main character.
Hmm.
And thinking about the juxtapositions and the conversations that I'm trying to incite with various iterations of myself.
Right.
So I think I kind of took that structure of a memoir and kind of superimposed it back into Saint's world. And
Hmm.
maybe novelists do some of these things organically, but it's the first time that I was like thinking about it very deeply on a daily basis. And so I
Yeah.
wouldn't move on from composing a certain scene until I could I could see, you might not be able to see it, but
Hmm.
until I could see the three versions of Saint, you need three notes to add up to a chord. And I wanted there to be three versions of
Yeah.
him in those scenes.
Yeah. Weaving him together with maybe invisible thread to us, but we see
Yeah.
the full
And so
picture.
like to go back to what you were asking about his father's memoir is in a direct response to publishing my own memoir.
Uh-huh.
Which is a really horrifying experience. Like when you go on tour with a novel, like it's
Yeah.
great fun. But I remember when we were having the launch event of Model Citizen at City Lights, I started to read the opening paragraph and I remember looking up at everybody being like, get out of here.
Hmm.
Like, these are my
Hmm.
secrets. Like, what are you doing here? And so that interested me. I had such a visceral reaction to that. I wanted to figure out a way to sort of dramatically explore those bemusing feelings on the page. And so I started to then cook up his dad, his name Tron, is one of my favorite characters in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. That it must be so liberating as someone who's written a memoir to get to give a character the ability to just drop it in the, the fire boldly every year.
Absolutely.
Oh, partially because, okay, he says, I know I actually have this in my notes. Um, he talks about Art Tron as he's explaining some of why he has done this, is that he talks about art making as an amputation, that you
Yeah,
create this thing, this beautiful thing with all of your love and passion and blood, and then you sort of have to wrap it up and sell it. And then it becomes this thing, this limb you chopped off yourself becomes unrecognizable to you.
right.
I wonder about how much do you think about that, about your art making while you're making it, after, when art feels like that. And I have another question about something else you call pure art later, but that how do you approach that sense that I'm going to have to like package this and present it to people? Um,
It's funny because in so many of the interviews I've done around Saint the Terrifying, everybody comes to that paragraph and asks
hmm,
about it. And what's so fascinating, if you had asked me right when I was just putting the book together, I wouldn't have thought that this would have been interesting to anybody.
hmm, hmm,
But it isn't, it's a way to us to kind of talk about art in this era of death rattle
hmm,
capitalism,
hmm,
where the majority of our zeitgeist doesn't read books anymore. Uh,
hmm,
how do you love something? I love writing in my bones.
hmm.
Being a novelist right now almost feels like being like a really good wooden shoe whittler. Like there's only like 12 people in the world who wear wooden shoes.
Uh-huh.
That's my cynical, analogy for
Hmm.
it.
But then we have maybe what you talk about for punk rock. We had something to say, and we didn't care that no one wanted to hear our songs. That was why our art was pure. That was what made it passion. And because
Yeah.
I held our punk rock in such esteem, I wouldn't let anyone corrupt our melodies of escape. Does punk rock ring like fiction for you? How are they this similar and how are they different, maybe? As
Well, I would always identify as a failed musician. And
Mhm,
I think that, playing in awful punk bands for so many years was great, great practice, right? Because
mhm,
when we would go on tour in the 90s, we're still trying to sell CDs to people, right? So I'm in some cowboy bar in Grand Junction, Colorado, and they didn't even want to listen to the band. And
mhm,
now I'm going up being like, "Would you like to buy our CD?" And they're like, "Get
uh-huh,
away from me. No." But it was really wonderful training to never rely on external validation.
mhm,
I think to be a real deal artist in this era of capitalism, like if you rely on other people to tell you that you're good at what you do or you've
mhm,
done something of value, that's poison.
mhm,
So I'm interested in the construction of the book. And then I'm a firm believer that once it's on the shelf, it doesn't belong to me anymore. Like, I
mhm,
believe a book is in suspended animation, waiting for an audience to generously bring it to life with her imagination and her human heart.
mhm. To
At that
respond.
point, it's
Mhm,
all theirs at that point. And so I think music is the same way, right? You
mhm.
write a song, and once it comes out, all of a sudden it belongs to the person who's listening to it.
Yeah.
The cool thing about the Saint project is earnestly, not to commodify it. I knew that he played in a band called Slummy.
Mhm,
So I thought to myself, I need to know what his band sounds like. So I just wrote a couple songs from his perspective. So I wrote riffs from his
Mhm.
perspective. I wrote lyrics from his perspective. And then when I sold the trilogy, I told my editor about it, and he was like, why don't I get you a record deal? Uh,
Mhm.
and you can go and make the record and we'll put it out. So it seems as though Saint has his own record out. So they actually pressed vinyl
Mhm.
time with the release of the first book in the trilogy. So a bunch of my friends, we met in a recording studio in LA. We made the record. My best friend in Seattle is a music producer named Josh Evans, who did Pearl Jam's last record.
Mhm.
And I told him, because I'm the godfather to his daughter, I
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
I'm not going to pay you $1 and you're doing this with me. We flew down to LA and made a record. So the whole project became this like kind of 360-degree view of Saint the Terrifying in a really, really inspiring way.
It's incredible. He really just comes, he gets to live and be alive on the page from your invention.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, okay, so I'm gonna ask a question now that I was warning you earlier before we started that this is a thing in this book that is a big like art cry trigger for me. So apologies if I tear up.
I think you
but-
should tear up. I think that
okay,
was really
okay, now I
stellar.
have to. Now I have to. So there's the pure compulsion to make art here, and we have Tron as he's burning his memoirs is saying books are for the future, and he's saying that sort of in a not a negative way, but he's saying that's not what I do. But then
Yeah.
we have this book here that you've put in our hands, and you have a passage in the book that feels to me like it is something that's for the future, and I'd love to hear you talk about it more. But it's
Yeah.
a passage where Saint approaches the sort of warehouse, art house, punk house that he lives in West Oakland, and it is on fire, and he can't access his bow. That is the last thing he owns from his father, and he can't access the other people who live there. The 36, I think, light elves is the word used. Is that right?
Yep.
Here. And I don't know how many people here who are from the Bay Area know or remember the Oakland ghost ship fire that happened my sense of time was destroyed by the pandemic. So a few years ago, many years ago. But you write, um, so Saint is able to sort of change history, but you write, um, it's possible that in those warehouses, and maybe there are some who aren't so lucky, my friends are lost, daughters and sons, mothers and fathers, siblings, surrogates, and brothers. And you talk about these light elves that if we they can, there's no way out. We have to say goodbye to these light elves, these friends who can still live forever. If we fan their story, if we tattoo their memory, if we make them transcendent, infamous, unforgettable. And then you list the names of the 36 people who died in the ghost ship fire on a one page or two pages, but there's a page that's just a list of names.
Yep.
Um, uh, why was it important for you to inscribe these here in this book for the
Yeah.
future?
Thanks for asking this question. I really appreciate it. One of the questions you hear novelists talk about is, what's at stake for their characters? And obviously, I have no problem with that question, but I do think that we can push it a step further and to say, like, what's at stake for you as the artist? And if you have to be out of your comfort zone, and I feel like if I'm not risking public humiliation in my next book, then I'm not stringing my artistic high wire at the right altitude. Um, Ghost ship is something that really, 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 really bothered me. I came of age in the warehouse scene in Oakland, and technically, the real ghost ship was not a punk house, right?
Hmm.
It was a kind of a community house
Hmm.
where a bunch of
Hmm.
broken toys lived, and I mean that as a total compliment because I'm a
Hmm.
broken toy myself. In the
Hmm.
reality of Saint's book, however, I needed it to be a punk house. I love revisionist history. So you think about, Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a great example, right? Where he figured out a way to save the lives of Sharon Tate and the other people who were tragically murdered by the Manson family.
Hmm.
And I wanted to use this piece of art to get those 36 people out of the ghost ship fire alive. And so the the high wire that I was walking, right, is to sort of make it true to Saint's reality, but never do it in a way that felt exploitative. I wanted it to always feel like an act of reclamation.
Mhm.
And when you that page that you're talking about, where I list all of the names of the 36 people who actually died in the ghost ship fire. In Saint's version of this, everybody gets out alive, but in reality, 36 very young people died that day. And
Mhm.
what I'm hoping is that everybody's here who chooses to read the book. What I'm really hoping is that when you come to that moment in the book, I hope you read all of those names out loud. I hope you vocalize those nouns. I hope you bring and breathe them up. And in that way, art can make these people live forever.
Yeah. But they are put here to exist here on the page with us and be as alive as these characters. And yeah, now they're inscribed for that future. I'm I felt like you did hope to me you did what you intended and really it felt very like I sometimes I use the word earned even and that's like the old like writing workshop voice in me. But
Right.
just it felt so genuine through Saint and so lived in this
Well,
story and
the big
yeah.
sleight of hand in that sequence is, it's written as though it's a crescendo. So it's this really exciting sort of external action
Hmm.
dominated world, but like I can't turn these people's legacies into an action movie.
Hmm.
Right. So like that it was I don't know if I've ever worked as hard on a sequence because I don't know that I've ever worn so much responsibility.
Yeah.
Like I wrote it through the lens of like I hope their family and friends read this. And if they do, like I hope it puts a smile on their face. And when you wear that kind of capital R responsibility as an artist, like hopefully that brings out the best in your
Mhm.
imagination and your work ethic.
Right. I think something because you've written this extremely character-driven book too is that you've already given us so much of Saint's twisted up compassion and his awareness of things that are going on in his community and the world,
Right.
even though he's been away, right? It feels very much like not just you reaching through the book to honor these people, but it feels like Saint would also maybe go down this flight of fancy himself
Right.
and think maybe there's some other world where this didn't happen the way it did here.
Well,
That must be so difficult to pull off
you
as
can,
a writer.
you can always sniff out when somebody has just like done research on Wikipedia, right? Because you might get the facts right, but you'll never get the culture right.
Hmm.
Like I lived in like gross, icky places like this for years, right? And so I'm able to talk about this from inside the culture
Hmm.
out rather than being
Hmm.
some like tourist with a set of binoculars, like peering in ghost ships' windows.
Right. No, it definitely feels that way here. At the same time, it's so funny as we were talking about this very beautiful passage, in the quote I mentioned earlier, you sort of celebrate the brand of bad taste that Saint speaks with. Um, but his bad taste includes these rushing moments of almost punk rock song in speaking, but also you give him moments of insight and revelation that you put on the page, which to me as a writer are the scariest things to write.
Yeah.
But there's lines that stuck out to me like, if that sounded naive of me, it was willful and it was an okay life, being willfully naive to the things that broke your heart. How did you balance um, like, is that something that is a struggle for you to write? Is how did you balance these moments of the profound insights from Saint with the violent action and his also more spinning, whirling, wild thoughts?
My in my office and like right above where the computer was where I wrote all three books. I wrote it in
Mhm.
Sharpie, so I'm
Mhm.
obviously not getting my security deposit back. One side it says write with teeth, and on the other side, right above it, it says write with tenderness.
Mhm.
This project is all about contrast, and then
Mhm.
he's going to show you a fist, and he's going to show you his soft belly, and hopefully you don't know which one it's going to be. Like I want the audience on her heels the entire time when it comes to saying, I want him to make you a little bit uneasy. I want him to be charming. I want him to be violent. I want him to be romantic. I want him to be all of these things. I always write character through this lens of the dignity of complexity.
Hmm.
I don't want anybody to be caricaturized, certainly not my main characters, but not even the tertiary players. But with Saint especially, like how can I write into that complexity and give him that dignity that we all want?
Hmm. And yeah, that he offers to the reader when he addresses us too. I want to make sure we have some time for questions from our people who are here with us. There is one that pops us in the chat, and I have more questions, of course. I could talk about this book for a long time. We have a question. Josh, you said this trilogy is an 1,000-page Viking epic compressed into 3 volumes. Can you say more about that? In which ways is punk rock story a Viking epic? And what does like epic mean to you?
Yeah, I always think about those old Dickens stories that were serialized in the newspaper back in the day. So while this is 3 sort of sovereign artifacts, to me, this is one long story that we're choosing to serialize. And the publisher's actually doing this really cool thing with it, where they'll do paperback originals for the 3, and then at the end, they're going to do one hardcover that has all 3 novels in it. In terms of the moves of it, what was really fun for me is I thought a lot about Godfather 1 and Godfather 2, and we'll just pretend
Mm-hmm.
Godfather 3 didn't happen. And so Saint the Terrifying is sort of Godfather 1, and that's the one that came out in October, where you sort of meet all of the characters in their present circumstance. June of 2025, so just a couple months from now, the second installment comes out that's called The Wolf Wants Answers.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 3 weeks after the events of book 1. We're on a very like hallucinogenic tour of the American Southwest. And because of some of the decisions he's made in book 1, there are some consequences that come calling. There's an elaborate flashback in the second book in the trilogy, like to get back to Godfather 2. When you think about that book, or that film, excuse me, it's always that big extended flashback with Robert De Niro, where he's playing the younger version of Marlon Brando's character. At the end of book 2, his Saint's love interest has to go to China. And so the entire third book in the trilogy, this is what I just finished last week.
Mm-hmm.
The
Last
entire
week, amazing.
the entire third book is set on a riverboat cruise on the Yangtze River in China. So I
Uh,
want each book to be in conversation, but I wanted each one to have a discrete setting and a unique kind of set of circumstances too.
does that mean you sort of trap this character on a boat for the whole time too? He's in a limited physically for where he can go.
Yeah,
Okay, wow.
they're called the house band on house arrest. So they're not allowed to leave until they play a certain number of days to pay off this debt that they've ensued from the antics of book 2.
Interesting.
But what's
What was
cool about the riverboat is that it's not a traditional boat. Uh,
mm-hmm,
remember that diner from Pulp Fiction
mm-hmm,
where all the wait staff are like pretending to be James Dean and Marilyn Monroe and Buddy Holly.
mm-hmm.
So the riverboat's like that, but with punk rock,
Okay.
right? Like Courtney
Uh-huh.
Love is a pit boss, and Kurt Cobain
Mm-hmm,
is a cocktail waitress, and Joey Ramone and Iggy Pop are
mm-hmm,
throwing poker, and
mm-hmm,
these books are just so much fun.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds incredibly fun to enter these worlds and just to follow this voice. Um, it's one of the I'm really interested in this idea of fun and joy in art making. You say write with teeth and write with tenderness, but was it ever a challenge for you to write with fun, right? To let yourself have fun writing or
It's a
um
really big part of my sobriety. Like
yeah.
I've been
Hmm.
off drugs since 2009.
Hmm.
And so at this point, like I write and play with my imaginary friends every day. Like it's just
Hmm.
a part of that kind of like cathartic routine, almost like exercise.
Hmm.
Since it's such sort of this fulcrum of joy in my life, and some of the writers that I love are write in those really joyous traditions. William Blake,
Hmm.
think about a great San Francisco writer, Richard Brodigan,
Hmm.
like humanists, like all writing with this big, sloppy, confused, beating heart.
Hmm.
Like I love art that is not afraid to not feel like it needs to be an expert.
Hmm.
Like I like books that kind of look you right in the eye or like, hey, are you a confused animal? Confused animal too. Like,
Yeah.
let's 5 or 6 hours hanging out together in this narrative.
Yeah. Though you dedicate this book to for those with tall tales and their those of us with tall tales and our tall hearts. So
Yeah.
even before the introduction speaks to us as the reader, you're definitely inviting us there.
Yeah, it's something I used to say to my daughter before I dropped her off at preschool in the morning.
Mhm.
I'd be like, what's in your tall heart, baby?" And she'd say, "Tall tales, daddy."
That's so lovely. This invitation to constant imagining is really wonderful.
Well, especially I think Saint's message of joy, especially with the current circumstances of the world that we're living in, life is constantly trying
Mhm,
to whittle away our whimsy,
mhm,
right? And what do
mhm,
we do? How do we maintain a sense of capital J joy, knowing all the immense suffering
mhm.
that's happening in the world right now? Like it's no easy feat, certainly.
Would you say, like, how would you describe Saint's particular brand of joy? Because I think it has its own complications, maybe too. How does Saint view joy to you?
I think with abstractions like that can feel a lot like some sort of hermetically sealed,
Hmm.
monolith. And I
Hmm.
think what's interesting about the way that Saint sees the world is it's never about the entire story. And
Hmm.
maybe it's a way that he's able to do his time in San Quentin. It's maybe the way he's able to, be an addict, how
Hmm.
he can lose so much throughout his
Hmm.
childhood is you find those little dollops. It's never the overall cohesive whole. You find like one little aspect of the minutia and you fetishize it and you fetishize it and you
Hmm.
use it to sort of blow yourself up with the helium of enthusiasm.
Hmm. You have a character who, when Saint encounters her, he talks about maybe she's having one of her little breaks. We have Hild is one of the characters. It
Oh
was one of
yeah.
my favorite characters.
Yeah, mine too.
Um, yeah, where did Hild come from? How did you find Hild as
That's a
well?
really great question. And
Yeah.
if there are any writers in the room, I think you would find this really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I try to never write scenes that I know are going to be rote and familiar or scenes I've seen a bunch of times. I always call those scenes in my work or students' work beige against the machine,
Mhm.
right? Like I've
Mhm.
seen this scene before, do something better.
Mhm.
And my hack or the way to avoid that is I always think about what the secondary character was doing 20
Mhm.
minutes before my main character walked into the room. So Saint very specifically has to walk into an army supply store to buy an eye patch. He had a fake eye and he's just given it to somebody to eat, which will make sense if you read the book. And now he wants to cover it up with an eye patch. So I knew I needed to write this like obvious scene. So it's
Mhm.
like, how do I make this interesting? Well, if he's going into a store, somebody has to work there. Okay,
Mhm.
that. I want it to be this old woman. Okay, what's her name? I want it to be Hild. Okay, what was she doing 20 minutes before?
Mhm.
Well, what she was doing, and it's not in the book, it's just what I need to know as a novelist to do my job right.
Mhm.
She's unloading the pepper spray and she accidentally pepper sprays herself.
Mhm.
So when Saint walks in the front door, she can't see him. So what I thought was going to be this beige against the machine, I need eye patch. Do you have eye
Mhm.
patch?
Mhm.
Suddenly, we don't even see that.
Mhm.
Suddenly, what Saint says to her is, let's go into the bathroom and I'll help you clean your eyes out. And
Mhm.
suddenly there's this right back to that T word. There's this really tender moment with him and this, complete stranger doing this really, really nude thing together.
Mhm.
So those of you who are writers and if you're ever bashing your head against a scene, we're almost always only thinking about it from our main character's perspective.
Mhm.
If you take the time to explore the status quo of your secondary character, like for example, if right
Mhm.
before our meeting started tonight, I'd won the lottery, I would have
Mhm.
a way different disposition of
Mhm.
otherwise if I had just been served with divorce papers.
Mhm.
Right. So
Mhm.
how can we use sort of the comet's tail of energy that your secondary characters are dragging into the scene as an asset in the tableau's construction?
Right. To sort of remember that they also have a past and future,
Yeah,
even if
I mean,
it doesn't exist on the
they
page.
have a novel underway. I'm just choosing not to tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I think that's very helpful for I know I've had some scenes recently that I feel like I'm really beating against some very clunky, dry dialogue, and I feel like this just thinking about a few moments before for some of these characters to be.
Well, when I started writing in Hollywood,
Mhm,
my writing partner is a great novelist named Ron Curry.
mhm,
And man, talk about, iron sharpens iron. Like my dialogue is so much better just based on our partnership, right? Because I'd
mhm.
throw scenes at him and he's like, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. I'm such a
Oh, oh,
thick-skinned person.
yeah.
That's the only way to work and to evolve. I'm not trying to get good at writing books. If it ever gets easy, I'm going to stop. Like
Hmm.
my goal in life is to remain an apprentice forever. And that requires, like going back to that artistic high wire, it
Hmm.
requires you to have the brazenness and the audacity to keep stringing that high wire at even more egregious altitudes.
Right. And then if you're every different project has its own height, has its
For
own
sure.
different
For sure.
relationship that it demands of you too. So that's fascinating.
Well, because
Yeah.
in the first book with Saint Juan, it's like I just need to write an interesting beginning to the trilogy, and then with Saint Two, it's like, well, this is the middle of the baseball game. Like the
Hmm.
fifth inning's not exciting. Like this is when everyone's going to go to get a beer. Like, how am I
Hmm.
going to make this something that they want to read? And then all of a sudden, as I've been finishing up Saint Three, which is called Laugh Like Killers, it's not just the end of one story, it's the culmination of 1,000 pages of material. So you're wearing all of this extra pressure. Again, I'm glad I did it, but I will never do this again.
Yeah, I guess how, because especially because they're coming out in this serial way, I've always been interested in this, reading like the classic serials. And of course, your answer is going to be exactly the same as Charles Dickens would have been.
Yeah,
But
we have a
how
lot in
much,
common. Yeah, sure.
yeah. I mean, how much did you know, especially with a book that's so much about the messiness, about following the voice, about following character? How much did you sort of know about where you were going plot wise, even though we're not interested, like plot is not your main interest, right? Did you have to force yourself to like throw a dagger in the future? No, you just let it still
I
ride.
I had no idea what the second book was going to be when I
Hmm.
finished the first. I had no idea what was going to happen in the third. Once I figured out about the riverboat, it was
Hmm.
like, oh my God, like this setting is, I love confined spaces as a
Hmm.
novelist. Like it's
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
favorite thing. So once I figured out that there was going to be sort of this, um, most Icelandic Viking sagas culminate at the gates of hell.
Hmm.
So I was thinking, like, what's Saint's version of hell? A corporate river cruise where they're co-opting punk rock is the worst thing he can imagine.
Hmm.
So, like,
Hmm.
that's his version of the gates of hell.
You find an uneasy peace with Whole Foods, maybe, but never with that,
Never,
right?
never the
Never,
riverboat
never
for
the
sure.
remote. Never. That is. I'm very excited to read that. If anyone has any other questions, we could take another question from our listeners. Or else, I would love to know. You mentioned two books already, but you also mentioned, you have these other books that are your sort of guiding lights, your maybe heart jewel in your chest, a jewel in your chest.
Yeah.
What are the other books of these kinds that have been guided you as an author throughout your reading and writing life?
There are books that I go back to
Hmm.
often.
Hmm.
James Baldwin's Another Country is my
Hmm.
favorite thing that's ever been written. And I've read that book 40, 50, 60 times.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's a durable piece of art. And what I mean by durable is it continues to cascade meaning every new time that you interact with it. Like
Hmm.
you would never listen to a
Hmm.
Radiohead song
Hmm.
and been like, I figured that out. And
Right.
when you listen to it, you notice another nuance or another idiosyncrasy. And Baldwin does that for me. And he writes with teeth and tenderness like nobody else does.
Hmm.
Amy Hempel's, I don't like all of
Hmm.
her career, but her first book is called Reasons to Live.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
whenever I feel myself writing lazy sentences, I immediately go to Amy Hempel and she
Hmm.
looks dead in the eyes and says, try harder.
Well,
Um,
Reasons to Live is the only Amy Hempel in the Peninsula Library System catalog. So
you're already winning, Katie.
convenient.
Perfect.
So there, I'm linking these in the chat to anyone who
And
wants to.
the final one that I would be remiss not to mention is Dennis Johnson,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who has meant just the world to me as a storyteller. His first novel was called Angels. I Know Where I Was.
Hmm.
The first time I read the book, and in fact, when I got to the last page, just one of those books that you immediately flip back to page one and be like, how the hell they pull this off? And you
Hmm.
reread it.
Yeah.
His book, Jesus' Son, I would say is a direct descendant of Brodigan that we were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
I'd say Brodigan is a direct descendant of Blake. And
Yeah.
if I really think about those three as sort of like spirit animals. The other book I've read incessantly is To the Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I
Well,
love writing character psychology. I love character interiority because it's all about intimacy.
hmm.
And nobody did intimacy like Virginia Woolf.
Hmm.
So if people here have never had the pleasure of reading that novel, like it's very short and it's certainly time well spent.
That was an amazing. Oh, I should find two Lighthouse. That was an amazing list. We have a Dennis Johnson is large. There's a huge amount of Dennis Johnson in the catalog.
Okay.
So please, I linked to Jesus' Son. It was on just page 15 of Saint the Terrifying that I thought of Dennis Johnson. So I definitely
Well, the
feel.
reason that I
Yeah.
named the
Yeah.
blind dude Dennis is to
Oh, of
where
course. Of course.
that's why it's Dennis with only
Yeah.
one N.
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. I somehow didn't catch that even. And oh, so a short story I have read over and over and over again. I've read Emergency a million times
Oh,
when I
yeah.
am also trying to sort of get myself out of too much reality to capture the reality.
Yeah.
And if there's a theme of injuries to eyes in that short story
Well, and
too.
that
Yeah.
really flamboyant, and we'll right back to that word Baroque sequence where he misunderstands that the drive-in is not angels descending from heaven. Like that's
Mhm.
like Saint's illegitimate uncle right there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is it's what I love seeing. This is I could see or sense that influence, but this is still definitely a voice all its own. So it was really exciting to read, and especially when that's when that is a of what an author I love. And I haven't read To the Lighthouse in so long, but I need to revisit it
Oh,
because
it's
I have
so
read it.
great.
Yeah.
It's so
I
great.
I love revisiting work as well. Um we have 2 minutes left. What are you reading right now that you love?
I'm reading a book called Crapalatia
Hmm.
by a dude named Scott McClanahan. That's he on the cover, it's kind of dubs itself a biography of place.
Hmm.
But if anybody digs kind of the down home sound of writers like Dorothy Allison or Donald
Hmm.
Ray Pollock or Daniel Gifford, um, Gifford? No. Why did I just botch that guy's name? Woodrell, Daniel Woodrell. You would certainly dig the way that Scott McClanahan writes, and the book's called Crapalatia.
Cool. I found that one too. Linking all these, and I can link these. Um, Hopefully, I can link these also in any follow-up email that I send to our registered guest here tonight. Other than that, thank you so much, Joshua. This was really fantastic, and I really enjoyed this conversation, especially love getting into the nitty-gritty of writing and getting to soak in not just writing advice, like writing wisdom from both the page and from hearing you talk about the things that you offer your students. Oh,
Well,
awesome. Okay.
I
Hmm.
would talk shop with you all day long,
Yeah.
so I really
Yay.
appreciate the hospitality.
Aw. And thank you everyone who has been here tonight. Make sure you check out smcl.org/author talks for all of our future talks. We have a lot of great things coming up that are starting to be scheduled through early into the summer. So definitely check those out. And we would also appreciate it if you could tell us what you thought of this event tonight at smcl.org/slash rate this event. Oh, I'm definitely at the end of my night tonight because I'm losing speaking and typing abilities, but that is okay. That means my heart and brain are full and buzzing right now, which is the best
Well,
way to
keep
end.
fighting the good fight, everybody. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Bye, everybody.